Hi, I'm Joris. I'm the head of production at Sutton Community Farm.
Hello, I'm Jala, the second year growing trainee, formerly known as the apprentice.
So we would like to talk to you about two kind of broad themes today. One is to do with how our growing plans have changed given changes in how we sell, so how that impacts on what we produce. And the other thing is kind of continuing to talk about how we manage our growing activities in order to best build and create healthy soil. Over the last year, some big changes have happened in terms of the number of veg bags we're selling, and a lot of the restaurants we've supplied over the years were closed. So we asked ourselves, what happens if we don't do restaurants and we focus all of our production in onto the VegBox scheme? And when we do this, we have an opportunity to take some of the peaks that we produce out of the system, and instead to try and distribute those crops or that land to produce crops, so we're having more availability for more of the time, without so much of a glut of one thing like courgettes.
The biggest way that's shown itself at the farm is what we're growing in our polytunnels. So last year we had really good success with growing courgettes in tunnels and managed to increase our harvest by 5 weeks. We got courgettes 5 weeks earlier. So we're doing that again this year with many more courgettes so that more people can have them. We thought we'd give this a go with our beans, so we're growing beans in tunnels for the first time as well. And the other thing that's changed is our tomatoes. So with more diversity in crops, we are growing less tomatoes. That's a good thing to avoid that glut that Joris was talking about. And we're also focusing on more varieties of classic medium-sized reds versus cherries. And outside, that's changed by less salad but loads more squash, which is great.
Another change we've made outside is we've been practicing growing beetroots for the last few years, and that's been going really well. But not everyone loves beetroots as much as we do.
How could you?
So
So delicious!
We thought instead of doing 2 crops of beetroots in a year, we're trying to do a second crop. Instead of beetroots followed by beetroots, we're doing a second crop of carrots, and we're also doing a second crop of fennel. And so these will just give us a bit more diversity, so a little less beetroots.
Out in the field, what we want to talk to you about as well is our continuing experiments of trialling moving away from tractor use to no dig, no till. So very basically, no dig, no till is about reducing the amount of damage that you do to your land and increasing your soil health and soil biodiversity. When you use a tractor, typically you're breaking up all of the soil interactions happening beneath the ground, and all the beneficial interactions and relationships, all the things living in there get damaged and disturbed. So by moving away from that, you are preserving that and increasing the health of the soil, and in return you're also increasing the health of your crops and the wildlife around it.
So at the farm we have a 6-year rotation, and we have 2 years resting in a green manure, and then we move on to brassicas, courgettes, some root crops like beetroots and carrots, alliums, which is like our onions and garlic, and then back to a green manure. And where we use a tractor is in the transition from one crop to another. So for instance, here we're standing in the green manure. There's a lot of organic matter, there's a lot of living plants, and in order to get them killed off so that we can then grow our kale or our cabbages, we need to rotivate it. So we typically rotivate it once or twice to break all that material down and get it ready for planting. And then as we're moving from our brassicas next year to our courgettes, we would then rotivate it again to prepare the soil, lighten it up a little bit, make sure there are no weeds. And then after the courgettes, when we're going in to prepare to plant our beetroots, we would again rotivate it to make sure there are no weeds and we've got a nice tilth. And then if we're having a second crop like our carrots or our fennel or more beetroots, we'd continue to rotivate in order to prepare those beds. And then before planting out our alliums, we often have a lot of weeds left over on our root crops, and so we'd need to rotivate it once or twice to get rid of the weeds but also create a nice light tilth. The leeks tend to be quite little and delicate when they go out, and it helps to have a nice seed bed. When we use the rotavator on our green manures, we do that really just to incorporate the seed so it germinates. Typically we'd have to use a tractor with a rotavator. So a rotavator is a piece of cultivation equipment that effectively has these big metal blades, and they chop up and they invert the soil, so they mix it all up. we'd have to use that at least 8 times to get through this 6-year rotation. But that is a minimum. Often it'll be more than that, depending on timings and what's going on. What we've been experimenting with is changing these transitions. So instead of transitioning between green manure and brassicas using a tractor, we're looking at preparing it by cutting the material low with a mower and then suppressing it with a Mypex. So Mypex is a plastic fabric that cuts out about 90% of light and still lets water through. So it still can breathe, but plants can't grow on it. So we can kill off the green manure with our Mypex, and then that allows us to transition through to our brassicas without having to use cultivation. And it's the same thing we can do, but it's actually not really necessary so much after brassica if we're using a Mypex to grow them through. But after our courgettes, we can use a Mypex to suppress that land, and then it's preserved ready for when we need it for our roots. And then when our roots finish, we can also suppress that off in preparation for our alliums. And in this system, we could probably get about 25% of our actively crop vegetable area into a no-dig system. And so that's what we've successfully experimented with all these transitions, and it's just a matter of time before that kind of becomes our system, really. So it's been quite a challenging weather year for us. Very wet throughout winter and spring, also continued to be very cold, so that's been a bit of a challenge, encouraging lots of slugs and not giving the plants as much sun warmth as they'd like. Other than focusing our production on the VegBox scheme and experimenting with fitting no-dig into our rotation, we've also been doing things like trialling an early crop of broccoli and cauliflowers. We're trialling switching our plastic strings in the tunnels to a jute string to reduce the amount of plastic. Also soil blocking. There are lots of experiments happening, and it's a very exciting year.
Yeah, thanks for listening, and look forward to your questions in the Q&A.